Detective Clara Hayes gripped the steering wheel tightly, her breath fogging the car window as she ascended toward the small town nestled in the folds of the rugged peaks. She had never been to a place quite like this, remote, isolated, and wrapped in a silence that seemed to swallow sound whole. Ahead, the cluster of buildings emerged from the mist, their outlines blurred by the creeping dusk. The town looked as if it had been frozen in time, its weathered facades and narrow streets bearing the weight of countless winters. Clara's eyes flicked to the dashboard where her phone buzzed silently, a message from the police department confirming the details. Mayor Elias Marrow had vanished without a trace 2 days prior. No ransom, no threats, no clues. Just a hollow absence that had left the town on edge. She parked in front of the town's only inn, the Maplewood, its faded sign creaking softly in the cold breeze. Inside, the warm glow of low lamps revealed a handful of patrons clustered in whispered conversation. Clara's boots echoed on the creaking wooden floor as she approached the counter, where a woman with weathered features and keen eyes looked up. This was Maggie Thornton, the innkeeper and the town's informal historian. "You must be Detective Hayes," Maggie said, her voice low but not unkind. "We've been expecting someone." Clara nodded, pulling her coat tighter around her. "I'm here to find out what happened to Mayor Marrow." Maggie's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "Well, you've come to a town full of secrets, Detective. Be careful which ones you stir." Before Clara could respond, the door to the sheriff's office down the street opened, and a stocky man in a weather-beaten uniform stepped out. Deputy Sam Collins offered a handshake that was firm but hesitant. "Welcome to Hollow Ridge," he said, his voice edged with a mixture of professionalism and something darker, perhaps conflict. "We're glad you're here, but I won't lie, this place doesn't take kindly to outsiders poking around." Clara met his gaze steadily. "I'm here to get to the truth, Deputy Collins. Whatever it takes." As night descended, Clara walked the silent streets alone. The windows of the small houses were shuttered tight. Any light inside was dim and flickering. Whispers trailed off as she passed, and the weight of unspoken fears pressed down on her like the dense mountain air. Each face she saw, each guarded glance, hinted at something buried deep beneath the surface. The mayor's disappearance was more than a missing person case, it was a rupture in the fragile fabric that had held this town together. Somewhere in the shadows of these mountains lay the hollow promise that everyone here had made, a secret pact binding them in silence and fear. Clara's fingers tightened around the notebook in her pocket. She would need every ounce of her sharp intuition and persistence to unravel the layers of deception waiting for her in Hollow Ridge. And she already sensed that the truth would come at a high cost. As the clock struck midnight, Clara stood on a ridge overlooking the town. The stars were distant and cold above, and below, the town lay quiet, but not peaceful. Somewhere in that silence was the answer she sought and the danger that came with it. She turned back toward the inn, ready to begin the long, winding path toward the truth. The fading daylight cast long shadows that seemed to cling to the weather-beaten buildings, the scent of pine and wood smoke weaving through the cool breeze. Her boots crunched softly on the gravel, each step echoing a mixture of anticipation and wariness. She had arrived only hours ago, but already the weight of the place pressed on her, a feeling not just of isolation, but of something concealed beneath the surface. Her first stop was the town's inn, a modest but sturdy building that served as the unofficial hub of local news and gossip. Inside, the air was thick with the warmth of a crackling fire and the faint aroma of strong tea and aged wood. The room was sparsely furnished yet welcoming, its walls lined with faded photographs and relics from decades past. Behind the counter stood Maggie Thornton, the innkeeper, her keen eyes briefly flickering with recognition as Clara entered. Maggie was a woman shaped by the mountain town itself, weathered features etched by years of hard living, yet eyes sharp and alert, reflecting a depth of knowledge few outsiders could comprehend. As Clara approached, Maggie offered a nod, moving efficiently to pour a cup of dark, bitter tea. The clink of the porcelain was the only sound in the brief silence that followed. "Detective Hayes," Maggie said, her voice steady but cautious. "I've heard you're asking questions about Elias." Clara accepted the tea with a nod, studying the woman in front of her. "Yes, His disappearance has left the town unsettled. I need to understand what's been going on here, especially the nature of the agreements he made with the residents. Maggie's eyes flicked toward the faded photograph hanging above the fireplace, a portrait of Mayor Elias Marrow, tall and lean, his calm but commanding presence immortalized in black and white. That man, Maggie murmured. He wasn't just a mayor. He was the town's anchor and its secret. Clara leaned forward, sensing the gravity behind those words. What kind of secret? Maggie hesitated, her gaze drifting to the fire's flickering flames. Decades ago, when the town was little more than scattered cabins and stubborn souls trying to carve a life from the mountain, Elias made a promise. Not just a promise, a pact. Every family, every individual, it bound us all. But it wasn't just words on paper. It was something more. A hollow promise, some say, but one that kept the town safe. Clara's brow furrowed. Safe from what? From outsiders, Maggie replied quietly. From change. From the dangers of the world beyond these peaks. But that safety came with a price. Secrets that could never be spoken aloud. Debts that had to be paid in silence. The detective took a slow sip of her tea, the bitter warmth grounding her as the weight of the revelation settled. This wasn't just a missing mayor. It was a town held captive by its own history, its own fears. As the night deepened, Maggie shared fragments of stories, whispers of old grievances, silent betrayals, and a community bound by the unbreakable chains of that secret pact. Clara listened intently, her notebook filling with details that hinted at the complexity beneath the town's placid exterior. When she finally stepped back into the chill of the mountain evening, the stars began to prick the darkening sky. The quiet town seemed to hold its breath, the echoes of the past murmuring in the wind. Clara felt a stirring resolve within her. To uncover the truth behind the hollow promise, she would have to navigate a labyrinth of silence and shadows. Her investigation had only just begun. The path ahead was uncertain, but Clara was determined to follow it no matter where it led. The walls, paneled in dark, varnished wood, absorbed the low murmur of voices and the distant echo of boots on wooden floors. Across the desk sat Deputy Sam Collins, his broad shoulders slumped slightly beneath the weight of the weathered uniform he wore like armor. His eyes, sharp but tired, flickered with the hesitation Clara hadn't yet seen in the others. "Thanks for meeting me, Sam," Clara began, keeping her tone steady though her mind raced. "I'm trying to get a clear picture of what's going on here. The mayor's disappearance isn't just a missing person case. There's something beneath it all." Sam shifted, the chair creaking under his movement. "Detective, this town, it's complicated. We've all got our reasons for keeping certain things quiet." Clara nodded slowly, sensing the unspoken weight pressing down on the man before her. "I need your help, not just as a deputy, but as someone who knows this town inside out." For a long moment, Sam's gaze fell to the scratched surface of the desk. Outside, the mountain wind rattled the old building, a cold reminder of the isolation surrounding them. "You don't know what you're asking," he said finally, voice rough. "There are people here who protect their own, and not all of them play by the rules." She leaned forward, curiosity sharpening her features. "Who?" He shook his head, frustration flickering across his face like a storm cloud. "The elders. The mayor's closest allies. They built this town on promises, and some of those promises are better left buried." Clara's mind raced. The secret agreements she'd heard whispers about suddenly took on a darker significance. She thought of the fractured relationships, the silences that stretched between conversations like chasms. "And you, where do you stand in all this?" Sam's jaw tightened. "I'm stuck in the middle. I want to do my job, but I'm loyal to this town. Sometimes those two don't line up." The honesty in his voice was a crack in the town's fog. Clara knew she had to tread carefully. Pushing too hard risked losing a vital ally. "Help me understand. If the mayor's disappearance unravels everything, what happens to this place?" "Chaos," Sam said simply. "And maybe that's what some want." Their talk stretched into the fading afternoon light. Clara made notes, every detail a piece of the puzzle. As the shadows lengthened, she and Sam stepped outside. The mountain air was sharp, crisp against her skin, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The deserted main street lay quiet, the wooden storefronts standing like sentinels guarding secrets. "You believe the mayor's disappearance is more than a simple vanishing?" Clara asked, eyes scanning the silent town. Sam exhaled slowly, the breath misting in the cold air. "I know it is. And I'm scared of what we'll find once the truth comes out." As they walked back toward the station, the distant howl of the wind seemed to echo those fears. Clara's resolve hardened. She would have to navigate these shadows of loyalty carefully if she hoped to unravel the mystery. That evening, in the dim glow of Sam's cluttered living room, the deputy's defenses finally cracked. Photographs of the mayor, old newspaper clippings, and faded letters were scattered across the table. Sam's voice lowered, worn with regret. "He wasn't a perfect man," Sam admitted, eyes distant. "But he kept us safe, or at least, that's what we told ourselves. Those promises he made, they weren't just words, they were chains." Clara listened, absorbing the weight of his confession. The mayor's control wasn't just political, it was personal, binding the town in silence and fear. Sam looked at her then, searching for understanding. "You're poking a hornet's nest, Clara. Are you ready for what might come?" Before she could answer, a sharp knock at the door shattered the fragile calm. Both turned, startled. Silence fell, thick and heavy. Clara's heart quickened. The game had changed, and the watchers were making themselves known. "Who's there?" Clara called, voice steady despite the surge of adrenaline. No reply came, just the echo of footsteps fading into the night. Clara exchanged a look with Sam. The stakes had just been raised. The shadows of loyalty were growing darker, and the path ahead more dangerous than ever. As she sat back down, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that the town's secrets were closing in, and with them, the ghost of the vanished mayor was more alive than ever. The night deepened outside, but Clara's mind raced. Every whispered doubt, every fractured truth, led her closer to a reckoning that might consume them all. The hollow promise was unraveling, and so was the fragile trust she'd begun to build. She glanced once more at the scattered papers, the secret agreements waiting to be uncovered, and whispered to herself, "This town story isn't finished. Not yet." And with that, Clara prepared for the difficult road ahead, where every ally might be an enemy, and every truth could cut deeper than a blade. The small mountain town seemed to hold its breath, the weight of silence settling heavily around every corner. Clara had been here less than a week, yet the shadows clinging to this place were already beginning to feel suffocating. Tonight, her hope rested on a weathered box. Maggie had promised to retrieve a box that might hold the key to understanding the mayor's mysterious disappearance. In the dim back room of the inn, dust particles drifted slow and lazy in the slanting amber light, spilling through a narrow window. Clara carefully unpacked the fragile contents of the box, her fingers trembling slightly as she unfolded brittle sheets of paper. The ink was faded, the edges yellowed and fragile, as if the very air threatened to tear the truth apart. This was no ordinary document. It was the original secret agreement each resident had signed decades ago, a pact that Mayor Elias Marrow had crafted in his early days to bind the town together, or so it seemed. Maggie sat nearby, her face worn and guarded, eyes flicking nervously toward the door. "It's been locked away for years," she whispered, "because no one wanted to remember what we promised." "Not really." Clara nodded, understanding that this fragile sheet of paper was more than just a legal instrument. It was a symbol of trust, fear, and control. As she traced the faded signatures, a cold realization settled in. The hollow promise was no mere formality. It was a mechanism that had kept the town in a tight grip, a secret binding that had silenced generations. Hours later, beneath the deepening twilight, Clara met with Deputy Sam Collins outside the town hall. The mountain air was crisp, carrying with it the scent of pine and the distant rush of a cold stream. Sam's brow was furrowed, the lines on his face deepened by the internal struggle Clara had glimpsed in their previous encounters. "You're poking a hornet's nest," Sam muttered, glancing over his shoulder. "These agreements, they were meant to protect us. At least, that's what Elias said. But now, with him gone, everything we held onto feels like it's crumbling." Clara met his gaze steadily. "Protection through fear isn't protection at all. This promise, it's not just paper, it's a chain, and it's time someone broke it." The tension between them was palpable, a reflection of the town's fractured soul. As the night deepened, Clara returned to her lodgings, the hollow promise echoing in her mind. The wind outside whispered through the trees like a ghostly warning, rattling window panes and stirring restless shadows. She lay awake, haunted by the weight of broken oaths and the knowledge that the town's silence was bought at a steep price. The discovery marked a turning point. The hollow promise was no longer an abstract concept, but a tangible link to the mayor's disappearance. Clara felt the walls closing in, the stakes climbing higher with every secret uncovered. The town's history was not just buried in the mountains, it was etched into the very fabric of its people, and unearthing it would demand courage, sacrifice, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths. As dawn crept slowly over the peaks, Clara steeled herself for what lay ahead. The hollow promise was a shadow cast long and dark, but she was determined to follow it to its source, even if it meant confronting the very heart of the town's fragile peace. The silence was no longer just a void, it was a challenge, and Clara Hayes intended to answer it.
Clara Hayes sat quietly in a corner booth, her keen eyes fixed on the gathering crowd of town elders who had assembled in the back room. Their faces were etched with decades of secrets, lines deepened by worry and defiance. She had learned that beneath the town's picturesque exterior lay a brittle veneer, one that threatened to fracture with every probing question she asked. It began subtly that afternoon. Clara's visit to the town's archives had yielded a hint of the mayor's hidden agreements, but it was the wary glances and tight lips of the residents that told the real story. Now, as the elders muttered among themselves, their low voices carried the unmistakable edge of threat. Maggie, ever the cautious hostess, had reluctantly allowed Clara this glimpse into the town's core, but the tension was palpable. "We don't need outsiders stirring up old ghosts," one elder hissed, his sharp gaze flicking toward the detective. "Some things are better left alone." Clara's fingers tightened around her notebook. She had expected resistance, but the vehemence surprised her. "With all due respect," she replied, her tone steady yet firm, "knowing the truth is the only way this town can heal." A murmur rippled through the room, but before it could escalate, Maggie's voice broke through. "Elias kept us safe, yes, but at a cost. We all bear that cost." The conversation turned heated, voices rising in frustration and fear, as if the very air between them crackled with the weight of unspoken sins. Clara absorbed every word, every glance, aware that each elder harbored a stake in preserving the mayor's legacy or concealing its darker truths. Later that night, as Clara stepped outside to clear her mind, the sudden screech of tires shattered the mountain stillness. She turned just in time to see an unmarked car speed away, its headlights swallowed by the swirling fog. A crash echoed behind her, a loud bang against the side of her rental vehicle. Her heart pounded fiercely in the silence that followed. The message clear and chilling: some in this town would go to great lengths to keep their secrets. Back inside, Clara found herself alone at a small wooden table, the flickering oil lamp casting a wavering glow. She spread her notes before her, the fragile threads of the investigation beginning to weave into a dangerous tapestry. The weight of the mayor's hollow promise pressed down on her, its shadow long and oppressive. Her solitude was broken by a sudden knock. Deputy Sam Collins entered, his uniform damp from the rain outside. His eyes were dark pools of conflict. "Clara," he began, voice low and urgent, "you're poking a hornet's nest. They're watching, and not all of them want you to find answers." "I can't stop now," Clara said quietly, meeting his gaze. "This town deserves the truth, even if it's painful." Sam hesitated before nodding slowly. "Just be careful. Not everyone here plays by the rules anymore." The storm outside rumbled in agreement as Clara realized the investigation had crossed a threshold. The veil of silence was lifting, but the price of revelation was steep. and the mountain town's fragile peace was on the brink of collapse. With every secret clawed from the depths, the hollow promise that once bound the town tighter now threatened to unravel everything. Clara's resolve hardened. She would face the veiled threats and the shadows lurking in every corner because the truth was worth the risk, no matter the cost. As she prepared for the days ahead, a solitary thought anchored her amidst the rising storm. How many more lives had been shaped and shattered by the mayor's legacy? And who would stand behind her when the final reckoning came? Clara Hayes stepped carefully across the creaking wooden floor, the faint scent of cedar and old ink filling the air. The window, cracked and grimy from years of neglect, let in the waning light of the late afternoon, casting long shadows that danced across the room's cluttered surfaces. Her fingers traced the edges of a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and worn, the embossed letters nearly illegible. It had been tucked away behind a loose panel in the bookcase, hidden from casual eyes. Clara's pulse quickened as she carefully opened it, the fragile pages whispering secrets long buried. The handwriting was hurried, sometimes almost illegible, scrawled in black ink that had faded to a somber grey. Mayor Ilias Merrow's voice came alive through his words, conflicted man wrestling with the immense burden of control he wielded over his mountain town. The journal spoke of promises made and broken, of sacrifices demanded in the name of protection, and of the loneliness that accompanied his role as both guardian and manipulator. Clara read passages where Elias confessed his fears of outside threats, economic interests, developers, and government officials who sought to exploit the town's natural resources. He had forged secret agreements with each resident, binding them in silence with a hollow promise of safety and prosperity. Yet beneath the surface, those promises corroded trust, breeding fear and resentment. The more Clara uncovered, the more the town's facade of unity began to crack. The journal revealed fractures in relationships, alliances forged through coercion rather than genuine loyalty. It was clear the mayor's disappearance was not merely a mystery, but a catalyst threatening to unravel decades of carefully maintained order. Later that evening, Clara sought out Maggie Thornton at the inn. The firelight flickered across Maggie's weathered face, highlighting the lines etched by years of worry and guarded secrets. The inn was warm and comforting, a stark contrast to the chill of the mountain air outside. Maggie's eyes, sharp and cautious, met Clara's as the detective laid out her discovery. "I always knew there were things Elias kept hidden," Maggie admitted, her voice low and steady. "But reading those words, it's a different kind of pain. The town's been complicit in keeping those secrets alive. We all bear some of the weight." Clara nodded, feeling the heavy truth settle between them. The town's silence was a shield, but also a prison. As night deepened, Clara stepped outside, the cold air biting at her cheeks. The mountains loomed silently, their peaks shrouded in mist. The town below was cloaked in darkness, the windows of homes dim or shuttered. The discovery of the journal had shifted everything. What was once a puzzle was now a complex web of human frailty and moral ambiguity. She stood for a moment, gazing at the fading horizon. The mayor's intentions, though cloaked in manipulation, had been driven by a desperate desire to protect. Yet protection had come at a price: broken oaths, buried guilt, and a community held captive by its own past. Clara's mind raced with questions. How deep did the mayor's influence run? Who among the townspeople had truly benefited, and who had suffered in silence? And most pressing of all, would the truth bring healing, or would it tear the town apart? Her notebook lay open in her hand, the pages soon to be filled with new leads and revelations. But for now, the mountain town was quiet, holding its breath as the fragile peace it had known began to unravel. And somewhere, hidden in the shadows, eyes watched her every move, the threat of silence looming larger than ever. The hollow promise was no longer just a story, it was a call to action, and the consequences of answering it were yet to be seen. Clara folded the journal carefully, the weight of its revelations pressing down on her shoulders. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more confrontations, and the unyielding pursuit of a truth that could not stay buried forever. She was ready to face whatever came next. The air was thick with unspoken words, the silence punctuated only by the faint creak of the old ceiling fan struggling against the stale mountain air. Sam's brow furrowed as he avoided Clara's steady gaze. His weather-beaten uniform hung loosely around his stocky frame, but the weight of the decision before him was evident in the tightness of his jaw and the subtle tremor in his hands. "You know, Clara," Sam began slowly, his voice low, "this town, it's not as simple as right and wrong. There are agreements that hold us all together. Breaking them could mean, well, chaos." Clara leaned forward, her fingers lightly tapping a worn notebook filled with notes, witness statements, and fragments of the secret agreement she'd uncovered days earlier. But what if those agreements are built on lies and fear? What kind of peace is that? Sam's eyes flickered with conflict. "I want to help. I do, but I'm caught in the middle. The elders trust me to keep order, to protect the town. And if the truth threatens that, I don't know where my loyalties should lie." Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the distant murmur of voices gathering around the towns in Clara could hear the rising tension, the sharp edges of anger and fear slicing through the chilly air. Later that evening, Clara stepped onto the porch of Maggie Thornton's, the warm glow from inside spilling onto the frosted steps. Inside, the local historian watched her approach with a guarded expression, eyes sharp beneath furrowed brows. "You're stirring the pot, detective," Maggie said quietly, her voice steady but laced with warning. "Some here want to keep the past buried, no matter the cost." Clara nodded, understanding the delicate balance she was disrupting. But silence won't protect them forever. Not if the mayor's disappearance is a symptom of something deeper. Maggie's gaze softened just slightly. "Then you'll need allies. And right now, Sam's torn. You'll have to be careful whom you trust." The next day brought a confrontation that would linger in Clara's mind. Ellen Marrow, the mayor's estranged daughter, appeared at the sheriff's office, her presence as sharp as the mountain air. "You think you can come here, poke around, and unravel my father's legacy without consequences?" Ellen's voice was icy, her eyes flickering with resentment and pain. Clara met her gaze steadily. "I'm not here to judge, Ellen, just to find the truth." "Truth?" Ellen scoffed. "The truth is messy. It's full of broken promises and secrets. You're chasing ghosts." The tension crackled between them, a palpable reminder of the fractures running deep beneath the town's surface. That night, Clara sat alone in her temporary quarters, the flicker of a single lamp casting long shadows across her notes. The weight of her discoveries pressed down on her fractured loyalties, veiled threats, and the ever-present fear that the town might never forgive the past. Yet, beneath the weight, a stubborn ember of resolve glowed. She would navigate these fractured loyalties, seek out the hidden truths, and, if necessary, stand alone against the storm to bring justice to a town held hostage by its own secrets. But as the wind howled outside and the mountain darkness pressed in, Clara knew one thing for certain: the deeper she dug, the more dangerous her path would become. And in a town where every ally had a shadow,